went to the Rebbe to discuss my mother's illness. I went for two things. One, obviously, was a bracha. And the second one, it was an eitzah. There was a bachloikus among the medical people whether they should operate or not operate. To operate would be a possibility of curing her, but it would carry a risk as well. Not to operate would be to let things go as they are with its inevitable ending. And like a son, I was torn. And my mother, Aleha Shalom, couldn't make a decision. And so I went to the Rebbe. Interesting, the Rebbe didn't know me, didn't know my mother, didn't know anyone from the mishpacha. And when I looked at him, I saw tears. It like as if he was my brother, and I'm talking to my brother about it. And he gave the answer that one must operate. But that's inconsequential. What is of consequence, that not knowing me, and not even knowing, I didn't go representing Young Israel. I said nothing about me being in Young Israel. It was purely personal. And to show such empathy, such emotion, such care, such concern, that in itself is remarkable.
In 1985, approximately, when the Aleph Institute, which works with Jewish men and women who are incarcerated, and also in the military, had a program where we took men and women out of prison for approximately 2 weeks, where we trained them in various Jewish conduct and how to be helpful in what we called Jewish lay leadership. Since many prisons were distant from metropolitan areas, and therefore it was not easy for rabbis to visit there, and even when rabbis did visit, it was not often, and the issues that confront Jewish men and women in prison could be on a daily basis. How to pray, how to put on tefillin, how to study, what is kosher, and many such matters. And so we made an agreement with the Bureau of Prisons in Washington that they would allow us to take certain people that had certain criteria out of prison to a certain location where we would train them in learning and in prayer and in all kinds of laws and customs that are important to a Jewish person in such a limited environment, such as prison. And in this occasion that we took 20 men out of prison, we brought them to New York for a Shabbat. And this Shabbat, the Rebbe would have a public gathering called the Farbrengen, where he would speak to the public, and many thousands of Jewish people crowded into this large cavernous-like synagogue, where they would wait until exactly 1:30, and the Rebbe was very precise. When the clock hit 1:30, you knew the Rebbe was within seconds of coming out, or he'd just come out. He was always exact in his time constraints and his time frames. The way that the people would gather for this Farbrengen, because there was no sound systems, it was on Shabbat, and therefore you had to get up pretty close in order to hear the Rebbe, even though the Rebbe's voice resounded through most of that room, and most people could hear when it was absolutely quiet. But people would, so to speak, get into semi-reserved places early in the morning and sit there the entire time until 1:30, because otherwise someone else would get their place. Now, these men who came out of prison obviously were not used to this kind of a rigorous schedule and also keeping Shabbat. The prayer was 2 hours, started at 10 and finished just after 12. And they had a little period of time in between in order to make Kiddush, to eat, because they hadn't eaten since early morning. And so we arranged for a group of students to sort of sit around a table that would be enough place for these 20 men. And when they would come after eating close to 1:30, so they wouldn't have to sit through this whole hour and a half of just waiting, the students would get up and these men would slip into their places. That was the only way in which we could reserve space for them. In any case, the men went home to eat, and approximately 1:25, they all started coming back. At which time, Rabbi Groner, the Rebbe's secretary, came downstairs from the Rebbe's office, and at the edge of the room, he was looking for me. He asked, "Where's Sholem Ber Lipsker?" And I was on the other end of the room, and there was no passageways in which to get through. The only way you could get through to the other end so that I could speak to him was climbing over tables and over people's heads. And everybody was very accommodating. They recognized that it was significant because the Rebbe was not coming down. It was almost time for the Rebbe to come down. And Rabbi Groner, who always came down to the Rebbe, came down beforehand. And Rabbi Groner said to me the following, that the Rebbe suggested that the men who are here from the prisons should not sit at one table together. Because if they will sit at one table together, I would say the plurality of the community there are with beards and black hats and look like Hasidim. Here they were all clean shaven with modern clothes. So he says if a group like this would sit together, people would ask who are they and where are they from? And they would have to identify that these men are from prison, and so they might get embarrassed. So rather than put them around one table, they should put them around at various places around the entire room. And secondly, after the Farbrengen, the Rebbe was going to give a bottle of wine or vodka in order to have various groups take it back to their communities and, so to speak, have a participation in this gathering by taking something from this gathering and sharing it with their communities and giving them strength. And this was considered to be a great honor, and many people wanted to have that wine or vodka. And of course, the people would distribute it. The Rebbe would tell them to distribute it at the Farbrengen because it was Shabbat, so it was not like preparing for after Shabbat, but to distribute it at the Farbrengen. So the Rebbe said that this group deserves to receive this bottle of encouragement more than any other group. But since if he gave them the vodka or wine, people would also ask, what is this for? And they would have to identify them as people from prison, and that might make them feel uncomfortable. He was not going to give it to them, though they were worthy of it. During that Farbrengen, the Rebbe talked to the rabbis because it was the Shabbat after Shavuot when most rabbis come to the Rebbe, because it's the kind of a holiday where the laws are not so convoluted, and the laws of Pesach and Sukkot cover those laws as well. So if the rabbi had to leave for a holiday, he would leave for Shavuot. So many rabbis were there. And the Rebbe gave an extraordinarily sophisticated, deep discussion. And of course, all of his discussions were very deep, but this one was especially deep because it addressed explaining the most difficult chapter in the book of prophets, which is the vision of Ezekiel. And he explained it in metaphysical terms, in terms of practicalizing it, in Kabbalistic terms and so forth. And then he gave a talk to the rabbis about the fact that they need to review their studies and they should not sit on their laurels just because they had received ordination many years ago, but to continue in their learning process and continue in their growth process and so forth. And then he gave a talk, in the middle of that talk, to the prisoners. He talked about the concept of jail and about the fact that men who are incarcerated, men and women who are incarcerated, have a mission from Hashem that's extraordinary, because otherwise God would not put them in such a condition where they are exile within exile within exile. And he talked about the opportunities and the unique mission that these men are on. As we were translating to these men one at a time in the different areas that they were sitting, they were so extraordinarily moved and inspired that here was a rabbi who, so to speak, he admonished or, spoke more tough to the rabbis and lifted the prisoners. Here was a leader who cared about a Jew in jail. Here was a leader who took every precaution not even to bring any sense of embarrassment to a person in jail. And they were totally impacted. They could not believe that they were in the presence of such a person.